In the season's final power rankings, we've added to our usual 25 standouts the additional 53 teams that will be playing in the postseason, because why not? You can never have too many bowl games for some reason. Because 81 teams reached the 6-win threshold required for postseason eligibility, you won't be seeing any 5 to 7 teams below thanks to a academic progress rate, or Ole Miss obviously. Also missing from the festivities are Western Michigan, UTSA and Buffalo, which had enough wins to make to the postseason but were left out on account of there being only 78 spots. Now on to the mega rankings. 1. Oklahoma 12-1, 7-1 Big 12 previous ranking 1 this week beat TCU 41-17 in Big 12 championship next game versus Georgia in Rose Bowl. The Sooners are the Big 12's only program to make the playoff in its 4 years of existence. The defense had been criticized all season, especially after giving up 52 to Oklahoma State and 41-1 to win Baylor. That unit came to play against TCU, giving up 317 total yards and securing Oklahoma's 11th Big 12 win. No other team has more than 3. Baker Mayfield should practice his Heisman speech after throwing for 243 yards and 4 touchdowns. 2. Clemson 12-1, 7-1 ACC previous ranking 2 this week beat Miami 38-3 in ACC championship next game versus Alabama in Sugar Bowl. Clemson's third consecutive victory in the ACC game was never in doubt, as Kelly Bryant had 2 total touchdowns and passed for 252 yards, and the defense held Miami to 214 total yards and had 4 sacks. On this day, Clemson leaned on Bryant and that defense because the running game didn't show up at all, averaging less than 2 yards a carry, although Clemson had 4 rushing touchdowns from short distance. 3. Georgia 12-1, 7-1 SEC previous ranking 5 this week beat Auburn 28-7 in SEC championship next game versus Oklahoma in Rose Bowl. Auburn coach Gus Malzahn was correct in his assessment of how Georgia beat his Tigers the second time around. The Bulldogs flipped the script, especially in the run game. In the first matchup, Georgia ran for only 46 yards. In this game, Georgia galloped for 238 yards and got an efficient game from quarterback Jake Fromm, who had 2 touchdowns and 183 yards passing. 4. Alabama 11-1, 7-1 SEC previous ranking 6 this week off next game versus Clemson in Sugar Bowl. 5. Ohio State 11-2, 8-1 Big 10 previous ranking 7 this week beat Wisconsin 27-21 in Big 10 championship next game versus USC in Cotton Bowl. JT Barrett threw for 211 yards and 2 touchdowns less than a week after undergoing surgery on his right knee. Barrett also ran for a score, but his 2 turnovers kept Wisconsin in the game and prevented 2. Freshman J.K. Dobbins, who was named the game's MVP, ran for 174 yards, while the talented defense shut down Wisconsin's running game as the Badgers garnered only 60 yards on 32 carries. 6. Wisconsin 12-1, 9-0 Big 10 previous ranking 3 this week lost 27-21 to Ohio State in Big 10 championship next game versus Miami in Orange Bowl. Wisconsin's formula that had worked all season long was nowhere to found on Saturday as the running game and stout defense failed to carry the Badgers to the Big Ten. Jonathan Taylor had only 41 yards and Ohio State's offense repeatedly gashed the slower Badgers for big play after big play. Alex Hornibrook had 229 yards, but his untimely turnovers doomed Wisconsin. 7. Central Florida 12-0, 8-0 AAC previous ranking 8 this week beat Memphis 62-55 2-OT in AAC championship next game versus Auburn in Peach Bowl. In a span of 3 years, Central Florida went from the cellar of college football to undefeated and playing in a major bowl game. Mackenzie Milton threw for 494 yards and 5 touchdowns, and the Knights overcame 4 turnovers to win their 3rd conference seal in the last 5 seasons. The season was a perfect send-off for coach Scott Frost, who will coach the bowl game before departing for the Nebraska job. 8. USC 11-2, 8-1 Pac-12 previous ranking 10 this week beat Stanford 31-28 in Pac-12 championship next game versus Ohio State in Cotton Bowl. The Trojans used a 99-yard drive in the 4th quarter to hold off Stanford and bring home their first conference seal in almost a decade. Sam Darnold threw for 325 yards and 2 touchdowns in what could be his final game in college, and Ronald Jones ran for 140 yards and 2 scores as part of USC's 501-yard offensive effort. Bryce Love had 125 yards rushing for Stanford on a badly injured ankle, but it was not enough. 9. Auburn 10-3, 7-1 SEC previous ranking 4 this week lost to Auburn 28-7 in SEC championship next game versus UCF and Peach Bowl. After scoring on the opening drives, Auburn's hopes for a playoff berth in Seckle went down the drain thanks to an avalanche of penalties, special team miscues, 2 big turnovers and an inability to stop any Georgia running back. Kerryon Johnson came in with a shoulder injury and was ineffective, rushing for 40 yards on 13 carries as Auburn was held to 259 yards, its lowest output since a Week 2 loss at Clemson. 10. Penn State 10-2, 7-2 Big Ten previous ranking 11 last week off next game versus Washington in Fiesta Bowl 11. Washington 10-2, 7-2 Pac-12 previous ranking 13 this week off next game versus Penn State in Fiesta Bowl 12. TCU 10-3, 72 Big 12 previous ranking 12 this week lost to Oklahoma 41-17 in Big 12 championship next game versus Stanford and Alamo Bowl. TCU ran into the same problem it did when it faced the Sooners 3 weeks ago. The defense had no answer for Baker Mayfield and the Oklahoma running game. The Horned Frogs also ran into a surprisingly salty Sooners defense, which gave up less than 100 yards and no points in the second half. 13. Miami, Florida 10-2, 7-1 ACC previous ranking 9 this week lost 38-3 to Clemson in ACC championship next game versus Wisconsin in Orange Bowl. For all of Miami's magic through the first 10 games this season, it's now clear that the Hurricanes were not prepared to run with the elites. Miami was outclassed by Clemson and did not help matters by turning the ball over 3 times. Malik Rosier threw for only 110 yards and was picked off twice as Miami fell behind early and was unable to sustain an offense to get back in the game. 14. Stanford 9-4, 7-2 Pac-12 previous ranking 15 this week lost to USC 31-28 in Pac-12 championship next game versus TCU in Alamo Bowl. Bryce Love did everything he could to carry Stanford to the Pac-12, rushing for 125 yards and a 2 count on an injured ankle. Will he be close to 100% by the bowl game if he doesn't choose to skip it? 15. Notre Dame 9-3 previous ranking 16 this week off next game versus LSU in Citrus Bowl. 16. Memphis 10-2, 7-1 AAC previous ranking 14 this week lost 62-55 to OT to Central Florida in ASC championship next game versus Iowa State in Liberty Bowl. In a game that featured 117 points and almost 1,500 yards, Memphis rallied twice from 2-count deficits to push UCF to overtime. Riley Ferguson had 471 yards and 4 2-counts and the Tigers rolled up 753 yards of offense. The Tigers were done in by 14 penalties and 2 costly turnovers, despite holding the ball more than twice the time that Central Florida had it. 17. LSU 93, 6-2 SEC previous ranking 17 this week off next game versus Notre Dame in Citrus Bowl. 18. Virginia Tech 9-3, 5-3 ACC previous ranking 18 this week off next game versus Oklahoma State in Camping World Bowl. 19. Oklahoma State 9-3, 6-3 Big 12 previous ranking 19 last week off next game versus Virginia Tech in Camping World Bowl. 20. Michigan State 9-3, 7-2 Big 10 previous ranking 20 last week off next game versus Washington State in Holiday Bowl. 21. Northwestern 9-3, 7-2 Big 10 previous ranking 21 this week off next game versus Kentucky in Music City Bowl. Northwestern might be the biggest surprise in college football. Say what you want about its schedule, but winning 9 games is hard no matter who is on the slate. Fans should get one last look at Justin Jackson, who might be the best Power 5 running back you haven't heard of. 22. Washington State 9-3, 6-3 Pac-12 previous ranking 22 last week off next game versus Michigan State in Holiday Bowl. It would have been fun to see Mike Leach and his Cougars in a major bowl, but Washington State wasn out in 3 road games, including the season-ending Apple Cup, which could have gotten them a rematch against USC. 23. South Florida 9-2, 6-2 ASC previous ranking 23 last week off next game versus Texas Tech in Birmingham Bowl. 24. Boise State 10-3, 7-1 MWC previous ranking this week beat Fresno State 17-14 in Mountain West Championship next game versus Oregon in Las Vegas Bowl. Boise State came up big in the fourth quarter, driving 90 yards to put the winning score on the board and avenge last week's loss to Fresno State. Brett Rypien threw for 246 yards and the defense put the clamps on the Bulldogs' offense that shredded them the week before. Boise State has won 10 games for the 8th time in the last 10 years, and won the Mountain West for the 2nd time in the last 4. 25. Mississippi State 8-4 4-4 SEC previous ranking 24 this week off next game versus Louisville in TaxSlayer Bowl almost famous 26. Fresno State 9-4 next game versus Houston in Hawaii Bowl 27. Louisville 8-4 next game versus Mississippi State in TaxSlayer Bowl 28. Florida Atlantic 10-3 next game versus Akron in Boca Raton Bowl 29. San Diego State 10-2 next game versus Army and Armed Forces Bowl 30. Michigan 8-4 next game versus South Carolina in Outback Bowl 31. NC State 8-4 next game versus Arizona State in Belk Bowl 32. Toledo 11-2 next game versus Appalachian State in Armed Forces Bowl 33. Troy 10-2 next game versus North Texas in New Orleans Bowl 34. Army 8-3 next games versus Navy on Saturday versus San Diego State in Armed Forces Bowl 35. South Carolina 8-4 next game versus Michigan in Outback Bowl 36. Iowa State 7-5 next game versus Memphis in Liberty Bowl 37. Appalachian State 10-2 next game versus Toledo in Armed Forces Bowl 38. West Virginia 7-5 next game versus Utah in Heart of Dallas Bowl 39. Kansas State 7-5 next game versus UCLA in Cactus Bowl. Remember when Iowa State was on the fringes on a top 10 ranking? The Cyclones closed the season losing 4 of their last 5 games. If Louisville had any sort of semblance of a defense, Lamar Jackson's second Heisman would have been more than a dream. The passengers on the Lane train get to stay home in Boca Raton for bowl season, and no one, and I mean no one, thought FAU would win 10 games after looking pitiful in the early part of the season. The comeback kids 40. Oregon 7-5 next game versus Boise State in Las Vegas Bowl 41. Texas A&M 7-5 next game versus Wake Forest in Belk Bowl 42. SMU 7-5 next game versus Louisiana Tech in Frisco Bowl 43. Marshall 7-5 next game versus Colorado State in New Mexico Bowl 44. Central Michigan 8-4 next game versus Wyoming in famous Idaho Potato Bowl 45. Arizona State 7-5 next game versus NC State in Belk Bowl 46. Kentucky 7-5 next game versus Northwestern in Music City Bowl 47. UAB 8-4 next game versus Ohio in Bahamas Bowl 48. Northern Illinois 8-4 next game versus Duke and Quick Lane Bowl 49. Missouri 7-5 next game versus Texas in Texas Bowl. Oregon spent a majority of the season without its starting quarterback, Justin Herbert, who broke his collarbone. The Ducks are a different team with him under center, and the Las Vegas Bowl is a good opportunity to show what could be coming next year in Eugene. In December 2014, UAB shut down its football program, citing financial difficulties. The Blazers came back in a big way, earning bowl eligibility in their first season back. Keep an eye out for UAB's Spencer Brown, a dynamic freshman who ran for nearly 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns this season. College football's Jekyll and Hyde 50. Southern Miss 8-4 next game versus Florida State in Independence Bowl 51. Iowa 7-5 next game versus Boston College in Pinstripe Bowl 52. North Texas 9-4 next game versus New Orleans Bowl 53. Ohio 8-4 next game versus UAB in Bahamas Bowl 54. Arizona 7-5 next game versus Purdue in Foster Farms Bowl 55. Wake Forest 7-5 next game versus Texas A&M in Belk Bowl 56. Akron 7-6 next game versus FAU in Boca Raton Bowl 57. Colorado State 7-5 next game versus Marshall in New Mexico Bowl 58. Navy 6-5 next game versus Army on Saturday versus Virginia in Military Bowl 59. Florida International 8-4 next game versus Temple in Gasparilla Bowl. Iowa is the biggest enigma in college football, thrashing Ohio State by 31 points at home, then losing to Purdue in the same stadium 2 weeks later. On the bright side, the Hawkeyes did beat 4 teams that made it to bowls this season. North Texas, which lacks much notable football tradition outside of Mean Joe Green, won 9 games under the outstanding leadership of second-year coach Seth Littrell. Another season like this and programs that have vacancies next winter will come calling. For those who didn't stay up late to this season of Pac-12 After Dark, Arizona quarterback Khalil Tate is must-see TV. He is known to break off a long run or 5 during the game and could have a 250-yard game against Purdue's defense. On the upswing 60. Texas 6-6 next game versus Missouri in Texas Bowl 61. Arkansas State 7-4 next game versus Middle Tennessee and Camellia Bowl 62. Boston College 7-5 next game versus Iowa and Independence Bowl 63. Western Kentucky 6-6 next game versus Georgia State and Cure Bowl 64. Utah 6-6 next game versus West Virginia and Heart of Dallas Bowl 65. Houston 7-4 next game versus Fresno State in Hawaii Bowl 66. Wyoming 7-5 next game versus Central Michigan in famous Idaho Potato Bowl 67. UCLA 6-6 next game versus Kansas State in Cactus Bowl 68. Utah State 6-6 next game versus New Mexico State in Arizona Bowl 69. Florida State 6-6 next game versus Southern Mississippi in Independence Bowl. The pixie dust worked about as well as Tom Herman warned us it would this season for Texas, which hung with Oklahoma, USC and Oklahoma State, but somehow lost to Maryland and Texas Tech. Better days are ahead in Austin. UCLA, another team that has talent and failed to capitalize, fell to rock bottom after a thrilling comeback in the opener against Texas A&M. That slide got Jim Mora fired and led to the hiring of Chip Kelly. The Bruins should thrive again under Kelly in a hurry. The worst of the best 70. Purdue 6-6 next game versus Arizona in Foster Farms Bowl 71. Duke 6-6 next game versus Northern Illinois in Quick Lane Bowl 72. Louisiana Tech 6-6 next game versus SMU in Frisco Bowl 73. Virginia 6-6 next game versus Navy in Military Bowl 74. Temple 6-6 next game versus FIU in Gasparilla Bowl 75. Middle Tennessee State 6-6 next game versus Arkansas State in Camellia Bowl 76. Texas Tech 6-6 next game versus South Florida in Birmingham Bowl 77. Georgia State 6-5 next game versus Western Kentucky and Cure Bowl. These teams aren't necessarily bad. All of them won at least 6 games, but at times, seeing them play was tough on the eyes. Purdue showed remarkable improvement under first-year coach Jeff Brom, and with a few more years of this, he won't be at Purdue much longer. Texas Tech amazingly still has a coach after its roller coaster year. The Red Raiders again could move the ball on offense but got thrashed in just about every game on defense. Look for a plethora of points when they meet South Florida in Birmingham. Because someone had to be last 78. New Mexico State 6-6 next game versus Utah State in Arizona Bowl. Congrats to the Aggies, who are bowl eligible for the first time since the end of the Eisenhower administration. They won their final 2 games and can finally enjoy some national exposure and long-awaited bowl swag.